The only person, until now, who knows what I'm about to tell you is the Duchess, aka Morgan, aka Mo, aka my wife. So this is a big share. Please hold space for me. Here it is. I talk to myself out loud all day and at night. I talk to myself when I'm walking Ollie, the world's greatest dog. I talk to myself when I'm making dinner. I talk to myself when I head to the bathroom in my co-working office space. I look like an idiot, but I sort of don't care. And here's why. For starters, talking out loud helps you to think. Try it sometime. Talking out loud about a problem or challenge that you're working on out loud can actually help you think differently and problem solve more creatively. But the other reason I talk to myself out loud, that reason is a bit more embarrassing. So here's my shame spotlight. I need some more space to be held for me, please. Here we go. I talk to myself out loud because I used to have a hard time talking to people. I'd get in my head and I'd fumble my words. And you know what that's like. You reflect later on a conversation that went sideways and you think of all the things that you'd wished you had said at the time. That was me. So I began practicing my speaking. I would rehearse what I wanted to say because the words never came out right. And when words don't come out right, you often get wrong results that you don't want. So before important meetings, before important business deals, before important heart-to-heart conversations, I practice out loud to get the words right, to say what needs to be said cleanly. And saying what needs to be said is a vital skill for forging your business life. When we avoid tough conversations, we avoid resolving issues, and over time, like weeds, those issues can get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then you really have a mess on your hands. Or we put off a conversation about what we want, a raise, a promotion, acknowledgement. So we stay stuck, maybe even grow bitter. Or we go into tough conversations like samurais and chop up our clients, chop up our colleagues, chop up our partners. We go into tough conversations guns a-blazing. We make an even bigger mess out of things, and then we have to go back and apologize. Now we have another tough conversation on our hands. And who wants to turn one tough conversation into multiple tough conversations? How about we nail the first tough conversation and say what needs to be said so we can move on? Join me as we learn how to say what needs to be said effectively with as little stress and catastrophe as possible on this episode of The Business of Being. This is The Business of Being, a podcast about the intersection of life and business, how the inner work of being prepares us for the outer work of doing and succeeding. I'm your host, Stephen Megling. My guest is Mindy Flanagan. Mindy is not your stereotypical HR person. You know what I mean, the HR person who won't give straight answers, who acts like the only solution is more paperwork and red tape. Mindy is the opposite. She tells it like it is, but Mindy does so with compassion. Mindy is the founder and chief inspiration officer for Inspiring HR. Her company's slogan is HR Done Differently, and she and her team embody that belief. HR the way it's meant to be, people-focused, solution-focused. Mindy and I discuss handling one of the gnarliest kinds of business conversations, when you need to deal with an employee who's not performing. But Mindy's advice can be applied to any conversation when you need to say what needs to be said. Stick around after our conversation. I want to talk with you about coming into tough conversations clean. Mindy, welcome.
Thank you, Stephen.
I'm so happy you're here today, especially for this topic.
Thank you for inviting me. Now, make sure I talk slow because you know when I get passionate, I talk fast.
No, I want you to speed it up.
Okay.
This is a passionate topic here.
All right.
On saying what needs to be said.
all day long.
Yes, and listeners, that laugh means something. You'll hear more as Mindy talks. That's a foreshadowing laugh.
I don't have trouble with opinions or being frank, that's for sure.
Well, and then maybe let's get into it.
All right.
Because I think some of our listeners are frank and can say what needs to be said. And then they have to take the foot out of the mouth, redirect, come back to a business conversation or otherwise. And then other listeners, and I probably fall into that category, hesitate. Don't bring up the elephant in the room or whatever the phrase is. And then we get into trouble because when you're not addressing things, things tend to get worse.
Yeah.
At least in my experience.
Yep.
So maybe kind of step us through, why do some of us tiptoe around the issue?
It's not comfortable. Isn't it human nature that the minute we feel discomfort, our body will actually have a physical response that gives us a propensity to shut down in some form. And it really takes a lot of work to say, I don't want to live with that discomfort, or evolving enough as adult to say, I may not want to address it, but my short-term pain is easier to handle than the long-term prolonged agony where now it's not just me that's uncomfortable. My inaction or my inability to address this is trickling out to affect other people. So I just think, I'm not saying somebody new in their professional life, like a high school or a college grad, would know how to have the courage and find the right words to have the difficult conversations. But I feel like for grown adults that do the work, particularly those in a leadership position, you listen to others, you watch, you have great mentors around you. You're around people that you trust, whether they report to you or not, to give you feedback, and you're open enough to hearing that feedback and improving. You get to a point that, yeah, it's uncomfortable, but I'd rather deal with the here and now than prolong the agony. That's, I guess, been my journey somewhat.
And as I've known you, one of the things that I appreciate about you is your willingness and ability to just come out and say it in a assertive way, but a kind way as well.
Yeah, I had to work it the kind way. I've stuck my foot in my mouth plenty of times, and even through that journey, I've learned the art of an apology, how to give out a meaningful apology and give everybody the space they need to rebound from whatever the wrong was, and certainly not finding the right words or saying something the way it wasn't intended to be felt, the impact of that. Yeah, I don't always get it right now. I mean, I'm very candid even with my team sometimes on my team meetings, and I believe in the trickle down influence of leaders. And I'll reflect after the fact some meetings, and in a moment of me being passionate about an opinion, did I go a little too far negatively on something that may have inadvertently trickled down negatively to my team? Probably. But that's when you become aware of it and you apologize and you regroup and you say, shouldn't have said it this way. Here's why. If you would give me the opportunity to have a do over, here's the way I would have rather said it. And then open up a conversation around that.
So I'm hearing you share, Mindy, that part of the formula on saying what needs to be said is not just in the moment, but sometimes after the moment. I think you used the word reflection. And now, was that skill of reflection, was that something that you were born with? Did you cultivate?
I was an insecure teenager who always worried they were bothering people or doing things wrong. Somewhere in there was a destructive habit that I, along the way, turned into a positive. It's almost like what made me a nervous, anxious teenager and not having social self confidence. I was able to turn into a higher level of self awareness, I guess, as I grew in getting more comfortable in my own skin, I think. I've never really thought about that until just now, but I had so much self doubt. Interactions that I had with friends where I thought I was bothering them or didn't say something the right word. The journey when you're a teen, you're trying to get as many friends as possible, maybe even be in the popular crowd. And there's all kinds of journeys, when we're in our teens in terms of finding our people and getting comfortable in our own skin. And people may have thought I was confident then. I was not, but I was able to turn what I could now say was probably a negative into more of a positive as a continuously evolving adult.
Which is the journey I think we all hope that we're on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Certainly.
Yeah. And I'm a lot more open to feedback now on things to improve on. I wish I had the same love of learning when I was a teen. I'm loving podcasting and reading and challenging myself to improving, and part of that encourages my team to manage up and speak candidly at what's bothering them. What did I say that bothered them? What are their thoughts on saying it a different way? And we have a really collaborative environment. I wish I was this open-minded and eager to learn in my younger years, but I'm here now and I'm having fun.
Same with me. Same journey. Same journey.
Yeah. It's almost like, did we waste high school on teenagers? Like, I'd really like to go back and do history class all over again. Why didn't I pay attention? I don't know.
Well, you touched on something as you were reflecting on your journey and improvement that seems to be true for me, or as I like to think about it with business, is I don't know that we can compartmentalize our personal lives and our business lives as well as we think we can.
No.
And especially, I keep finding that it doesn't always seem to be obvious to me, Mindy. And I'm just going to go out on a limb here, and I can trust you to push back or change gears on me. It just seems to me that a lot of the conflict that we run into in business, if we look back in time, we can kind of see a thread from things that happened in childhood or experiences of how we felt growing up. Have you run into that as you work with leaders across now the country?
Yeah. Do you remember how long ago was it? We heard about work-life balance. It's still
Mm-hmm.
out there, right? The work-life balance. I don't know if there's no formula for balance because everybody's different in terms of how much they want to work, how much they've involved themselves in personal demands. Everybody's family dynamic is different. It's just everybody's wired differently in terms of what they choose to be passionate and engaged in and how much time and attention that devotes. And can you fit that all into a 24-hour period while you're still getting 8 hours of sleep? So, that's quite the variable. This is sort of related to this question, but maybe slight switch on gears, but I feel like related to. I'm seeing more and more of the differentials in the workplace in terms of, we'll call it work life balance, work life blend, being able to have the dividing lines. I almost think of the journey I had with my business coach for a period of time because I work from home and I love what I do, but I was burning myself out because I wasn't observing boundaries. I think of boundaries and compartmentalizing
Mm-hmm.
kind of the same. My point in all this is there's so much that we're grappling with right now in the workplace. We've got older generational workers, males for the most part, that just don't seem to understand why people aren't working as hard as they did when they were 20 and 30 years old. And I don't even think that's a fair comparison. We're living in completely different times. You and I could have a whole separate hour-long conversation about completely
Mm-hmm.
different times. So what they achieved as this is work and this is home, for a lot of them, this is work and it's 50 or 60 hours a week and this is home. They achieved that because they were the primary breadwinner, and what was their personal life and how their personal life was made available to them was largely because someone was at home raising the kids, taking care of the house, running the errands. So it's like, and I fast forward to now, everybody's working in some way, shape, or form. So that set recipe of how to compartmentalize and blend, knowing that every generation is not going to like the generation behind them or the generation in front of them. I don't, it's just a really interesting time of so many differing dynamics that play into, is it work life balance? Is it work life blend? How do you set boundaries? I just think it's different for everybody. But the tricky part is, if it's different for everybody and you're leading, say, a team of 10, if it's different for everybody, how do you make different from everybody work into a winning recipe where you need teamwork and collaboration for great outcomes? It's not an easy call.
No, it's not. And that kind of goes back to this topic of saying what needs to be said, because there are many different views out there,
Hmm.
and our teams are checking in different places,
Hmm.
mentally, physically, geographically, of course. And so I'm putting myself in the shoes of the listener who is putting off of a conversation with a team member, an employee. They want to be mindful, for example, that, okay, my life is different than yours. in many ways, and I want to honor your unique life. And
Hmm.
yet there's this thing that I've got to deal with. And like, how do you broach that subject?
Well, now I'm going to give you the dreaded HR answer.
Oh, here we go.
The dreaded HR answer really is, how much did you have your ducks in a row in terms of what the position required? And did you make the right hiring decision for the person that is now filling that position in terms of the must do's every day versus where there's flexibility in the role? You've got to really define the role and understand how to get the right person in the right seat. If you've done those things and you still need to have that hard conversation, I find the hard conversation a lot easier because you were fair, transparent, and clear all the way up to the point there was a challenge. And you can always redirect back to, love you as a person, want to do everything I can to be accommodating, see you grow, see you succeed. But there is still a business to run. There's still clients depending on us. There's still core essential duties that have to be satisfied. Now, on certain days, does that mean other team members may need to cover for you? Yes. But for the most part, there's always a balance within the team where the coverage is always adequate. And if one team member needs far more flexibility and coverage than other people, and you've explained what their core responsibilities are, you can only twist and turn so much before their needs are detrimental to the needs of others, their coworkers and customers or operations or whatever obligations your company is trying to meet or whatever services your company is needing to provide. So I'm always intentional with making it not necessarily about the person as much as there is still a business to run, and there's a reason we define the job this way with core responsibilities. And when those core responsibilities constantly slip, you have to appeal to a sense of reasonableness and treat them like an adult where you're empathetic, you're kind, you're caring, you want them to succeed. But it's easier to have that hard conversation of, see how I'm showing you here based on everything we've talked about why these things continuing not to be met by you have to be met by someone else somehow. And this is where you start to talk about, I know you're not intending to cause an undue burden, but that's what we're facing. How can we work together to fix this? So one thing I'm proud about in our workplaces. I'm seeing this more and more. We've really evolved away from the HR talk of the 80s where we believed we were hiring children. We should talk to them like children. We should run our workplaces as dictators, and everything that wasn't going right meant punitive action against the
Mm.
employees. We're really, I'm seeing this wave of moving away from that, doing a lot more collaborative adulting back and forth, regardless of whether or not you're in a leader position or not. You've still hired adults. Treat them like adults. Treat them like adults. Have reasonable conversations until such time that, yeah, they may push you, that you've got to take decisive action because they've stepped away from the reasonable person standard. But until then, I'm loving that we're seeing more and more leaders embrace their relationships and these hard conversations with direct reports as peers, not children. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
I really like that trend. I'm really, really happy about it. Yeah, it's little things like, you read in the handbook from 1980s, disciplinary action. Well, again, what are we putting adults in timeout? What do you mean disciplinary action? I like coaching. I like counseling. Corrective action is fine. People are going to make mistakes. They make repeated mistakes. Maybe you counsel them on it, but I'm not a big fan of disciplinary, progressive discipline, probationary period. What are we saying, that after we hire an employee, we're going to assign them to a probation officer for their first 90 days? I mean, just I'm happy to see a lot of these punitive, outdated terms go away in terms of how we talk from leader to employee and employee to coworker.
It's a good trend
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
And you shared so much value in those last few minutes that I just want to kind of go back in time a little bit and better understand. You talk about a reasonable person standard.
Hmm.
Tell me more about that.
Oh man, I probably stole it from an employment law attorney. And by the way, I am not one. Very sensitive to the line between HR skill, expertise, and opinion versus, yeah, we need to ask an employment law attorney. I think sometime early in my career, it may have been mid career. I mean, I've been at this almost, since 1993. So What is that? Am I going on 30 years? Is that what 2023 is going to bring me? Yeah. Somewhere in my journey, I heard someone talk that made a difference where when you're having it had to do with minimizing risk. Pretty sure I once did a presentation that was called Poor Performing Employees Don't Be Held Hostage. This was years ago, but it kind of speaks to you don't want to have the hard conversation. And when you don't want to have the hard conversation, you're choosing to be held hostage in a way because you're fearful of something. So, okay, well, let's talk about those fears. Minimizing risk. There's lots of things that HR professionals, HR consultants, anybody in really a decision-making capacity in a business does to make sure, are we minimizing risk? There's lots of risks out there. What can we do to minimize them? And one of the ways to minimize risk with employees that you think you might have to involuntarily terminate is if I was the employer who had to involuntarily terminate an employee, and that employee decided they were going to make trouble for me. Might have been justified, might have been not, but if they're going to challenge me for some reason outside of involuntarily separating them from the position and asking them to leave the organization, would an outside objective third party conclude that I did everything in my power to keep them employed and give them an opportunity to succeed until it was no longer reasonable to do so? Enter that third party objective reasonable person standard. If an outside party looking in really evaluated what went wrong, would they deem one or both parties to meet that reasonable person standard? I think that may even apply in court rulings or court decisions, or maybe I heard it somewhere from an employment law attorney in the course of doing a deposition, but I've leveraged it a lot to implore people to try and stay seated at the reasonable person table, particularly when they're preparing for a hard conversation and their emotions may get the better of them.
And what you just said is why I gravitated toward that phrase, not understanding the components of it or the background until you just shared it with us.
Mhm.
Is I thought, oh, reasonable person standard. My interpretation, which was fairly on track, maybe not quite as in depth, was can I get outside of my own head here? Because
Mhm.
this is a tough conversation. My pulse is quickening. I get nervous about confrontation. And can I just think about this situation in an analytical way, just
Mhm.
neutral thinking,
Mhm.
reasonable person standard, like whether it's an employee or a colleague, just speaking with a colleague. And can I just think about this as how would a reasonable person think about this
Right.
or approach it? Or am I being unfair
Mhm.
as an employer or a manager here? What is that reasonable person standard?
Yeah. I mean, and sometimes for those of us that talk shop at home with the spouses, have we created an opportunity for the spouse or the significant other to say, "Come on, you're being ridiculous." And you think for a minute and you're like, "You know what? They're right. I had a tough day. My emotions are raw. I'm being way too hard on that person." And then that's the end of it. So that's the one thing that's really helped me, really being welcoming of feedback from the people that are around me that I trust to say. And you got to, one thing I've had to learn is, you try and prove yourself early on, particularly you get that first manager job. And I'm still living at a time where I get the first manager job and I'm one of the rare females in the room. And you want to come across like you know everything and you can't be vulnerable. I love that I have gotten to a point where I just feel comfortable enough to say to everybody I have around me, I love to lead. I'm good at it. Never going to be perfect at it. I am completely comfortable not being a perfect person and not having all the answers. Come on, give it to me. Feedback. Where can I improve? But you think about how long that takes in life to get there. And some people never get there. They think they always have to play like, I'm perfect. I know all the answers. I've got it all together. I know what I'm doing. I don't know if you really need that if you've really surrounded yourself with great people.
It's interesting. I just had another discussion for this first season, and that thread of what you just shared really came through in my last discussion too. Maybe the universe is trying to let me know I need to be a little bit more vulnerable and open to the fact that I don't know everything.
Yeah.
But but I'll just say those people are boring. I don't like to be around people who seem to know it all.
I find that the know it alls, they mask that with their micromanaging as well. They
Mm,
know everything, but they don't trust anybody. I don't know. It just seems so stifling and not the way I'd want to conduct myself in a day to day work environment for sure.
no.
Yeah.
And going back to our topic of saying that what needs to be said, suppose the person listening to this is getting ready to have that first tough conversation in her
Mhm.
career or his career, or there's a new inflection point. There's just dynamics at work here that just feel different. This time it seems harder.
Mhm.
Seems like what you shared a while back about just taking a look at the facts. Like, have I done the right things?
Mhm.
Like, that's a good step in the right direction to preparing for that tough conversation.
Mhm. Yep.
Talk to me about post conversation. Suppose it went okay, or maybe it didn't go well at all with this other individual, this hypothetical
Mhm.
conversation. What do you encourage people to do in terms of that reflection or that check-in after, the conversation?
Well, let me start with what you don't do. So it's possible when any of these conversation ends, you're wishing for some finish line that doesn't exist, right? Like, oh, here's where people really set themselves up for failure. I get ready to have the hard conversation, and part of my preparation for that and feeling better about motivating myself to have the hard conversation is I'm already picturing the ideal end to it. Where the person says, "You're absolutely right. I should be fired. I've loved being here. Let me just leave candy for everybody, write a raving review on Glassdoor, and I'll give you my last paycheck back." I mean, it's silly, but I mean, we play out like, I really don't want to do this. I don't want to have this hard conversation. But somehow you play out in your mind some scenario where the employee that just fired is happy. Sometimes they are, by the way. They won't say it, so they're relieved somebody else says and everybody can move on. But still then it doesn't mean there's some orchestra of happy music playing them out of the office. So if you set yourself up for some picture of how you think it's going to go and it doesn't meet those expectations, you're going to end up disappointed. So the first thing I can say is it's natural to think it's going to go a certain way, but don't put that so high up on the shelf that you end up really disappointed when it doesn't go that way. Kind of be realistic with how you think it might go. The other thing is practice a little bit. The more you practice and the more you get comfortable with your words without over practicing, the better you will be at navigating that conversation. But also accept this whatever way you practice it, you could stand in the mirror and practice something 10 times. And when you're in the moment and then you go after the fact, you start second guessing every word you say with, I wish I would have, I wish I would have, I wish I would have. Robin Green with Sandler, who I adore, taught me a phrase I'll never forget and I use all the time: head trash. Let go of the head trash. When these conversations end, accept that it didn't totally go the way you planned. If there's something to immediately act on, do it. And if you're feeling unsettled because things should have been said that weren't, but it's too late, or live with the moment, give yourself a deep breath, let yourself go through the feels, so to speak, and don't go. And a way to overcome all of that is not to create another mess by now jumping into something else hard to tackle for which you may make a bad call. You could be a little emotional right then. If it was a hard conversation that didn't go the way you wanted and you were feeling unsettled, give your brain and your emotions a rest. Go for a walk for 15 minutes, a half hour. Don't think that by jumping into something more complex, you are now going to make good calls and cross finish lines that are going to make you feel better. Unlikely. Give yourself time to work through the emotions and then get yourself back in the right headspace is my suggestion.
Yeah.
And also don't catastrophize. It may not have gone the way you wanted, and sometimes when it doesn't go the way you want, no, that doesn't immediately mean they're going down to the EEO office to file a complaint. I mean, I find ourselves saying, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? They're going to file for unemployment. Okay. Well, what if they get unemployment? Well, does that bother you? Well, I don't know. How does unemployment work? See, you're worrying about something that you don't even really know what the negative consequences of them being able to successfully file for unemployment if it was a termination looks like. So, find somebody to coach you, practice with, talk through the worst case scenarios. And all this is kind of the journey and the lead up to how you're gonna feel before, during, and after the hard conversation.
I appreciated the play by play. We've talked a lot. No, it's good because you really have to think about this. So what is the preparation? You've talked about that.
Yeah, yeah.
Looking at the big, did I hire in the right role? Was I clear? Like
Mhm,
look at all of these things. doing the practice round, knowing that it's not going to be perfect. It's never going to go the way you think it is. Setting the right expectations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? You're not going to shake your hand. So thank you so much for firing me today. This was the
Yeah.
best thing that
It's not going to happen. Yeah.
then, yeah. And then afterwards, if it doesn't go according to plan,
Yeah.
just pause. Don't jump
Pause.
into the next thing.
Yeah. Digest. Last time I think I had a hard conversation after the fact. It wasn't internally on my team. I think it was with a client. I knew it wasn't going to go particularly well. I went outside and pulled weeds for 15 minutes. It made me focus on one thing that didn't take a lot of mental capacity, but I felt good about pulling the weeds, and I processed and I felt, and then I breathed some fresh air, got some lunch, and then it was gone. And maybe I did it successfully compartmentalize away, and maybe it'll always stay compartmentalized away. Maybe the client will never bring it back up again, and it's more settled than I think it is. But don't we always find ways to rationalize and live with things? And it's part of our journey of what we choose to keep headspace and what we choose not to keep up headspace.
Absolutely. And in the reasonable person standard, in my definition of it, I keep thinking, I can't control how this other person will respond or react.
Hmm.
I can do everything I can. I can
Hmm.
have a good conversation. I can connect with the person. I can just have all the facts laid out. There's a lot that I can't control. And when you talk about, people wanting to just run back into doing the next thing, I think it's because that's our impulse as humans to like control, control, control. And if I feel out of control, well, I'm going to control over here. Sometimes you just need to pull some weeds.
Right. The two themes that we find the most are you're either really, really empathetic person and you really are worried about or you don't want to hurt someone's feelings. Well, that's great, but that's not a reason to adversely affect other team members, clients, and paralyze your business. I admire it, but it's not a good reason to paralyze things or to put something like that off, particularly when the hurt feelings might be short term and the employee may appreciate the candid feedback, the collaboration. You may have an even better relationship on the other side of that. That's always possible.
Mm-hmm.
But I could get sued. Anybody could get sued at any time. Don't let that hold you hostage. To the point I made about do the work, do the preparation. Anybody can sue you at any time for any reason. How you defend yourself is what makes the difference. And if you feel like you've done everything you can and documented everything you should to be able to defend yourself, should that reasonable outside third party look in, that's the best you can do.
Well said. Well, Mindy, as we move to close, I just want to quickly check in and I want to honor you. I'm laughing because Mindy and I, before we got started, talked about how we're not really into the praise thing. So, but this is how
I love to give it, not so good at receiving it.
Well, I'll be short and I'll be brief.
All right.
But ever since I've known you, you have been who you are. I've seen you in business meetings. We've had lunch together. You are who you are. And so when you say to people, do the hard thing, I've watched you do the hard thing. And that's rare and it's very valuable. So I just want to honor you with that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Wasn't Mindy great? I enjoy people who have distinctive voices, and that is Mindy. I also appreciate people who are great at their craft and acknowledge that they didn't always have the magic touch. Mindy's gifted at saying what needs to be said, but it wasn't always her superpower. In other words, you can get better at saying what needs to be said, even if you don't think it's your superpower right now. That's certainly been true for me. Remember, I had to rehearse my messages out loud before because I had such a hard time talking with people. What about you? I suspect there probably are conversations with certain people you've put off having because they're emotionally charged. You don't know how to break the ice. You don't know if the conversation will go sideways. You might say the wrong thing, make things worse. Maybe you need to talk with somebody who isn't that great at receiving feedback. But if you don't have the conversation, you won't get resolution, and that could make the situation even worse. So I want you to have the conversation and say what needs to be said, but I want you to come into that conversation clean. So what do I mean by coming into the conversation clean? I want you to be clean on the inside. No messy feelings. those messy feelings of anxiousness, stress, even anger can derail your effort to say what needs to be said. You might lose your cool and say something you regret, or come on too strong like a samurai ready to chop off the other person's head. I also want you to come into the conversation clean by knowing your goals with clarity. Be clear and be clean on what you want to achieve with the conversation. When you come into a conversation clean, emotionally, and with clarity on your goals and desired outcomes, you put yourself and the person you're speaking with in a far better position to have a win-win outcome. That's because you're clear-headed, you're calmer, you're more fully present. And when you're clear-headed, calmer, and fully present, you can participate in the back and forth of the conversation. Most of the time, though, we walk into tough conversations with our defense shields up, or with a chip on our shoulders. We anticipate injury. As a result, we often create the situation we're actually trying to avoid. So come into the conversation clean. Check in with yourself. Are you stressed, anxious, nervous, angry? Are you negative and already anticipating the outcome? It's just going to suck? If so, get clean on the inside. Remember when Mindy talked about pulling weeds after a tough client meeting? After she did that, she felt clearer-headed. What's your strategy for stress reduction and getting clean going into tough conversations? Come into those conversations emotionally clean. You might still have the jitters and butterflies in your stomach, and that's completely normal. That's just your body priming itself for an important moment. But don't let your emotions get the best of you. Come in clean. Are you coming into that conversation with a clear and clean perspective on what you want to discuss? Are you clear on your goals? What your desired outcomes are for the conversation? If not, get clean on your agenda. Write down your goals, write down your messages. Practice them out loud like me if you need to. Because when you're clear on what you want to discuss, you can be clear in the conversation. And the best goal for a tough or important conversation is a goal that both parties, you and the other person, can embrace. So think of your goal as the desired future state, one in which you both can look at and say, yeah, that goal, that desired future state is worth whatever temporary discomfort we might experience as we're having the conversation. That way you both work together on a shared vision for a shared outcome. Now it's your turn. What's an important conversation you've put off having? It's time to be brave. Schedule it, invite the person, then work on getting clean. Clean on the inside, and clean with your goals and your outcomes. That way, you can come into the conversation at your best, most vibrant self, and you give the other person the opportunity to do the same. And isn't that the ultimate goal? To connect with people openly, with a sense of ease and appreciation. To find yourself leaning into tough conversations you once ran from or only made things worse. Now, sometimes, no matter what you do and say, you won't get the desired result. But at least you can reflect on that conversation and know you did your best. So you can exit that conversation clean with no regrets. And you can bring that positive, clean energy into future conversations. And the next time, you need to say what needs to be said. The Business of Being is a production of Band of Misfits, your business life mentors. Come say hello at welcomemisfit.com. And while you're there, grab your copy of Misfits Microdoses, our email with drops of inspiration and insights to help you navigate your business life journey.
The show's executive producer is me, Sir Isaac Smith. We want the show to help as many people as possible on their business life journey. Would you help spread the word? Share this episode with a friend, on social media, and please leave us a review. Every little bit helps.
It certainly does. And Sir Isaac, you are a rockin' podcast producer, an audiobook narrator, and all these things. But I'm curious, if he had to start or decided to start a business doing something completely different than what you're doing now, what would you do?
I actually, ironically enough, was talking with the wife about this morning, just kind of a bit. I think I would like to do a food truck. I have just so many ideas, and it wouldn't be your typical food truck. It would definitely be a portable coffee bar, would be amazing, or a food truck with an industrial pizza oven trailer being pulled behind it. One of those two ideas, because those are the two staples in our household. We have home fire roasted pizza, and we have home roasted cold brew coffee. I would really like to take something else that I'm excited about, passionate about even, and turn it into an income stream, which that sounds a little too businessy to sound like I'm excited about it. Turn it into a career. And if I had to start all over again, that would probably be the industry that I put the amount of energy that I put into this towards.
Why a food truck? Why not a restaurant?
Two inspirations. One, if you've ever heard of Pat Flynn, Pat Flynn, one of his first podcasts that he made was actually about food trucks. And he uses this as a big example in some of his writing and some of his podcast literature. But he ended up selling that podcast, kind of like you would sell a blog. And that resonated with me, not just because of the idea, but also because of the demand for that market. So it caused me to do a little bit more research, and I realized just how cool it looked. Then my wife introduced me to this movie called Chef with Jon Favreau. And I just fell in love with I want to say, culture of that industry. It looks amazing. The food looks great. I love the story of that movie. It's on my list of, I think I have 5 movies now that I could watch at any time and it never get old. That's just what that did for me. So I'd like to give it a try.
I love it. Well, I don't know if you knew this about me, Sir Isaac, but I am a home chef.
I did not know that.
Yeah. I'm a man of many mysteries. I love to cook, but I'll tell you why I would never, ever, ever own and operate a food truck. You want to know why?
Why?
You sweat too much. It's hot in there. Come on. Oh my gosh. Of course, I'm told I'm a home chef, not a chef in a restaurant, but I'm told that restaurant kitchens are pretty hot too. So I guess I'll just stick around with making stuff in my kitchen. So that's cool. I appreciate that. I love that story.
For what it's worth, so are sound studios. I'm currently in a soundproofed room and I am sweating pretty bad. So it's pretty close to, well, I'll take that back. I reserve the right to be corrected, but I feel it's comparable.
Well, on that note, why don't you take us home, Sir Isaac?
For show notes, links, and behind-the-scenes shenanigans, visit welcomemisfit.com and click podcast. Until then, don't fit in, stand out.